Ben Stiller is just Adam Sandler for Democrats. It doesn't matter which one of these types of humor you enjoy more, the one thing you know for sure is that you're mighty concerned about the global rise in anti-Semitism, the biggest problem facing the world today. Look at Ben Stiller acting like a proud dad about Severance, probably because it's the first project he can actually be proud of. Whenever I listen to people talk about Severance and... Hang on, is that the girl from True Romance? Excuse me a second. Oh, sorry about that. It's just whenever I see an older woman that attractive, it just reminds me that life is always going to be good.
I'm just de-icing my stew.
Listening to other people talk about Severance and their theories about what the numbers mean makes me feel good about myself because it reminds me of how stupid other people are. You guys are just way off. I know better than you because I'm a self-proclaimed genius, and today I'm going to condescend to tell you what it's all about. But first I want to talk about my mom and how she always mistakes Adam Sandler for Ben Stiller. These two members of the Jewish faith are often mistaken for one another, and there are many forums online comparing them and their bodies of work. They both make the same movie over and over. The only difference is that Ben Stiller makes movies for the morons who look down on the idiots who enjoy Adam Sandler movies. And I look down on all of you. They don't look anything like each other, but the reason that they're so similar is because they serve the same function. They both play the same role in society, and that is to brainwash people into thinking that it's perfectly normal to be a passive participant in a barbaric 5,000-year-old death cult. Democrats will enjoy Stiller and Republicans will enjoy Sandler, but just like these two political parties, the only difference is an aesthetic one. It's red or blue, or in this case, Jew or Jew. Stiller has the aesthetic of sophistication and Sandler has the aesthetic of simplicity. But these movies have the same storylines, they have the same characters, they have the same shameless product placement, and they have the same racist jokes. I challenge you to find one foreigner in either of these fakakta mashuganas videographies that doesn't have a ridiculous accent or whose entire purpose is not to be some strange, silly assistant to the main character. Okay, now that we got that out the way, what do these numbers mean? What are the employees of Lumen actually doing? To answer that question, we need to answer a bigger question. What does Lumen actually do? Firstly, I feel like I need to point out that Severance, just like all good science fiction, is about current day real life. When George Orwell wrote 1984, he was writing about the year 1948. The year that both Israel and the apartheid state of South Africa were founded. Severance is about real life, where you have to go to work and pretend like the world is not being taken over by neo-Nazis. It's a world where we can watch someone undeniably and intentionally label themselves as a Nazi and people still don't believe that that happened. People do work that is meaningless to them. They are told that it is important, and at the end of the day, they don't really have a choice, so they have to become different people. When you are at work, you have to forget about the broader issues that plague your life, or your family, or your community, or your country, or the world at large, and instead focus on the minute, mundane tasks that may or may not make the world a better place at the end of the day. When I described the show to my uncle, he was just like, yeah, that's real life. This is the main focus of the show, in my opinion. And yes, while there is a real high-concept sci-fi story being told here with real moving parts that interact in satisfying ways, I believe it's all in service of an analogy for real life, about the current day, and about the real human condition that we all find ourselves in. To give a concrete example, Keir, the CEO who is worshipped by the innies, is similar to Elon Musk. We are told over and over again that these people accomplished great things, and we are forced to work for them. I make money for Elon Musk through PayPal, which I am forced to use. Meanwhile, these people are just from families whose wealth goes back generations, and there are systems in place to brainwash us into thinking that they have accomplished great things and that they deserve their position and that we're working towards something great. But what about the numbers? What is the purpose of the numbers? Listening to other people's theories on the numbers is what led me to make this video, just because of how incredibly wrong everybody is. There seems to be a prevailing opinion that the numbers actually mean something, but I think this is falling for a deliberate red herring that the show puts in there to make us think like that. The characters start guessing what the numbers mean, so we, the viewers, start guessing what the numbers mean. I don't buy it. At the end of the most recent episode, we see Gemma through the screen, along with a heads-up display with a litany of graphs and numbers, and these goobers think that Mark is the one who is refining Gemma. So let me get this straight. There's a naive mouse man walking around a literal maze with no idea what's going on. And then there's this stern-looking Asian woman in a white room with what seems to be a lab coat examining Mark. And Mark is the one who's the scientist? Mark is the one doing research on Gemma. These people think that the data on the screen is referring to the woman who seems to be directly examining Mark. So I'm supposed to believe that through these numbers and through some mysterious ability, Mark is somehow able to perform some sort of task on this woman that he's not even aware of. I genuinely don't understand how someone can be this stupid. These numbers are completely meaningless. They have to be. Otherwise, you have to presuppose some kind of magical ability that cannot be replicated by a computer, an ability that requires training that we do not see the outie or the innie go through. The idea that they have some instinctive subconscious reaction to combinations of numbers without being told what those numbers mean is pure voodoo. And it would really disappoint me if that was what the show was about. It would take a good show and turn it into a bad show. Actually, in fact, the only proof that you need that the numbers are meaningless is that they never make any mistakes. I've watched the series several times through, and not a single time did I see one refining error. They don't make mistakes. You would think if this was a real task with right and wrong answers, that the innies wouldn't just walk in and start getting the right answers straight away out of some kind of undefinable intuition. My thoughts are that the numbers are simply a record of the innie's emotional state, and that would make sense logically, because the innies are sorting the numbers based on what they feel emotionally. In other words, they are making a record of their emotional state. So they stare at the numbers all day, and then when they feel a strong emotion, they record it. Simple. In the real world, the science experiments that we are allowed to do are limited by ethics. For example, it's unethical to raise a baby in a padded room, cut off from all human contact just to see what happens. It's unethical to kill a man's wife just to see how he responds. This is something that scientists would love to do, if it were ethical, because the results of such an experiment would reveal a lot about how the human mind works. Having a blank canvas of a human mind upon which to carry out experiments is like the holy grail of scientific research, and people would pay billions of dollars for the opportunity. Science, data, is the most sought-after raw resource of the 21st century. Why do governments spend millions of dollars sending probes into outer space? Why do we explode gallons and tons of non-renewable resources above our atmosphere in order to send chunks of metal and mysterious glue halfway across the galaxy? Because the data that we could gain from such an experiment might make the difference in winning the next war, or surviving the next natural disaster, or ensuring the safety of the human race. Really, there's no telling what kind of profits are to be had from a new, never-before-seen piece of data. It's only once we have the data that we can assess its value. It's like playing a huge scientific lottery. But if you could artificially create a state of mind that humans could voluntarily enter into that would replicate the blank canvas of a baby's brain, then you would have taken a lottery and turned it into a money printing machine. Companies from around the world would be offering you their daughter's hand in marriage for the opportunity to use your human equipment to test whatever kinds of crazy experiments they dream up. And the list of experiments you can do on a tabula rasa mind is inexhaustible. Lumen exists in a world that has laws and where people have rights. They can't simply do whatever they want with the bodies of their employees without facing legal actions. But there is no limit to how many times they can do the same experiment, or how many times they've deleted Dylan, or how many times they've restarted and created a new Dylan innie. Just to illustrate how valuable these test subjects would be in the real world, I want to tell you a story about first-year biology students. But trigger warning here for extreme animal abuse. Seriously, you have been warned. If you're easily triggered and you just want to hear about Severance, skip this section and I'll timestamp it for you. First-year biology students are required, and here comes the animal abuse. First-year students are required to snap the necks of little white mice whenever they become contaminated or compromised. This can simply be that the mouse has learned something that it wasn't supposed to learn, it was exposed to something it wasn't supposed to be exposed to, or it was simply used already. This is really hard on the poor biology students at first. I bet it's even harder on the mice. But it's hard on the biology students because they are human beings. But after a while, they start to get used to it because it's just part of the job. Before the mouse was compromised, it was useful to the experiments and might produce useful results. It might produce a billion-dollar idea. But once the mouse has eaten the fruit of the forbidden tree, it now becomes completely worthless and is only worthy of death. To a scientist, we are all those worthless rats that might as well have their necks snapped, for all science is concerned. There are just too many confounding variables at play. How is the scientist supposed to know that the reason you don't like monkeys is because of the little bell that he's ringing and not because your mother dressed you as a banana when you were a kid? Again, if someone was able to take a worthless test subject and remove all of the confounding variables, that would be a trillion-dollar idea, and every test subject would be worth billions. You, yourself, dear viewer, would be worth billions if only your mind was wiped clean. Just on that note, humans are incredibly complex machines, and we still do not know how human babies acquire language. It's completely different to the way that LLMs acquire language, because babies only need a few words from their parents, nursery rhymes, some songs, and an LLM only needs the entirety of human writing and the entirety of the internet to get, your answer wrong. We still have no idea how human babies do this, and the data that reveals how they do would be worth a lot of money. You could imagine a society where cameras and microphones are distributed to families around the world. There would be a huge incentive to gather data from their children. In order to create a test subject that has a completely clean mind, you would need a lot of science up front. So Lumen could be anywhere along this process of developing the severance procedure. They might have just developed the severance procedure recently and are just testing to see whether it works, which would explain why Mrs. Cobell is so interested to see what they can and cannot remember. Alternatively, they might be well along into the process of developing the severance procedure, and now they are taking on all kinds of experiments from clients. Experiments such as, can you train a human man to think that he is the mother of goats or other animals? The memory separation process can clearly impact what they are able to remember at varying degrees. The innies remember some things and not others, and I'm sure if Lumen wanted to, they could make it so that they forget absolutely everything, including language, reducing them to the state of absolute babies. And perhaps the reason that they allow the innies to retain language is because they want to run experiments on more advanced developmental subjects. All this is speculation, but one thing that I know for sure is that the Severance chip does not give any random person the magical ability to sense combinations of numbers. This is the part that just makes no sense to me about other people's explanations. They seem to think that suddenly any random person working as a security guard or history teacher can just develop this incredible ability to sense or detect all kinds of incredible phenomena through obscure combinations of random numbers. Like suddenly they develop this ability that not even computers are able to achieve. Like there's something really special about human intuition that not even these geniuses who are able to create code detectors and the severance procedure itself, splitting people's brains into two, they can't even figure it out. They need these half people with magic intuitions. It just doesn't make sense. Maybe it's about responsibility. Maybe these companies are outsourcing the responsibility and the guilt of the heinous crimes that they commit to their unaware employees. But that's just not how it works legally, and it's not as if companies in the real world have a hard time getting criminals to carry out their dirty work. Maybe this is an advanced form of non-disclosure agreement where nobody, not even the employer or the employee, knows what's going on. But still, this is unsatisfying due to the magical voodoo nature of the process that I've already explained. There is a companion piece called the Lexington Letter that sheds some insight into what Lumen might be doing. In the letter, an employee lays out some theories about the numbers involving some terrorist acts around America. Some people will point to this as proof for their theories, but there is no telling that the employee who wrote the letter is on the right track, or that the van didn't just explode by coincidence at the same time as the refinement. And this theory suffers from all the same problems that the previous theories suffer from, namely the magic voodoo element. Most people assume automatically that Lumen is evil, and on the face of it, yes, it does seem immoral. But in the real world, there are companies that are extremely controversial that carry out experiments on humans and animals. And these experiments are controversial even though the results of these experiments could bring about products that save millions of lives in the future. Lumen is just as morally ambiguous as these real-life companies. Yes, they are torturing their employees, but the employees consented to it, they are being compensated, and there's a chance that their sacrifice may result in a huge benefit to mankind. It may be that once Mark and his buddies discover the true purpose of Lumen, that they come to accept it and see it as necessary and good. And perhaps this is why Helena doesn't care at all about her innie counterpart, even though her father seems to be a complete freakazoid. The severance procedure is controversial, which means that a lot of people actually accept it. About 50% of people accept the severance procedure. If you compare the severance procedure to experimenting on actual babies, of course the severance procedure is way more ethical. The show would be a lot darker if it was just about experimenting on actual babies. And this is because babies cannot understand consent, let alone give it.
Don't punish the baby, Rickon.
Being severed in this case is just like volunteering for drug testing. The only difference is they just tell you that it's a job instead of telling you the specific thing that you're going to be doing. I think most people would be fine with somebody undergoing the severance procedure if they stated that they cared very deeply about the scientific results that the procedure would produce. Similar to how a lot of people are happy to be organ donors. I believe they would be happy with the sacrifice. Happy, that is, until they realize that the severance procedure produces a human that is basically like a baby with a new consciousness, and that there is no difference between experimenting on a baby and experimenting on a severed person's innie counterpart. This is the conflict that Severance places us in, and the root of the controversy in the show. Lumen is hiding the true nature of the severance procedure, and the employees believe that if the world knew what it was like to be an innie, that it would stop. But on the other hand, it might just be so that the results of the experiment were so beneficial to mankind that the discomfort of many sub-personalities is worth the indispensable benefits gained from torturing them. I like this because it firmly places the world of Severance in the real world, because that's exactly how we see employment. It's a necessary evil. But this is what makes the show so compelling. The questions about consciousness and the suffering of the unheard. Severance places us in the position of the mice who have their necks broken, and it asks us whether it's worth it. Okay, so Lumen is a science-producing company, which makes sense because they are mentioned as being part of pharmaceuticals and tech, the two main industries that focus on research and design. But what specific experiments are they doing on the severed floor? I think that Lumen is developing more brainwashing techniques. This is their main product. How to dominate people and society. If you are in charge of an innovation company, if you are the CEO, the important thing is not innovation. The important thing is staying on top. If a competitor innovates, you acquire their innovation so that you continue to stay on top. You don't actually have to innovate yourself. You just have to make sure that nobody else does. And if they do, you have to take credit for it and control its products. And it's in this way that you always stay ahead. I believe that Lumen is developing methods to continue to stay in power, and they are probably competing with other companies in other countries around the world. During the process of developing the severance procedure, it must have taken a very long time to get the innies to stop killing themselves and each other, or from attacking the supervisors. It must have taken a lot of time and effort to get them to remain calm and complicit for most of the time, and even to self-supervise. The games, the rewards, the weird religious stuff, the paintings, the lighting, the way that they talk, these can all be attributed in some part to ensuring complicity and docility. The break room is like writing lines at school. It's just a tried and tested non-violent punishment for children that keeps them busy while also getting them to internalize some message in the most monotonous, soul-crushing way possible. I had to do that at school when I was in detention, often. I had to write over and over again, honesty, integrity, self-discipline, commitment, respect, and look at the good it did me. There are many examples in the show of classic psychological topics, such as tribalism, between the departments, behavior that gorillas and chimps and even goblins are known to engage in. Lumen, in this case, is intentionally fomenting distrust between the departments, and then when an altercation ensues, They don't rush to their assistance. In fact, they sit quite calmly and observe them. So I'm 100% certain of this. Lumen is a research and development company. Their severed employees are their human assets that they use to carry out all kinds of weird experiments for clients. And this is why you see all kinds of weird stuff happening on the 7th floor. I'm 100% certain of this, and I will be proven right. Or I'm just wrong about everything and I shouldn't have made this dumb video at all. Seriously, the show is that good that I'm gaslighting myself. I don't know, maybe the show really is about terrorism and Dylan Irving, Helly and Mark are just sitting there all day just blowing up Palestinian children. Can you imagine if the show turned out that way and it turns out Helly and Mark are just blowing up kids and it gets all political and they join Antifa and Bernie Sanders gets severed and he falls in love with Baron Trump in optics and design? That would be great. That would be great. I don't know. In comparison to these other people's theories, I think my theory looks pretty good. I say I don't know. I think I do know. I know. My theory is good. It's good. It's the best. I'm right. So thanks very much for watching, guys. That's the main thesis of the video. But now I'm just going to do some afterthoughts, just some just little tidbits that are unrelated to the main meat of the video. Milchick and Cobell are definitely not normal people. Like, I know Milchick says that he's unsevered, but, you know, maybe Milchick and Cobell underwent a earlier version of the severance procedure, maybe one where their memory was completely wiped out and they started as completely new people. Some people have suggested that Mrs. Cobell was a nurse previously, and that makes a nurse for the Egans, and that makes a lot of sense. And it also made it so that I can't stop picturing Patricia Arquette in a variety of different nurse outfits. A lot of people are saying that Helly is lying about who she is in season 2, and I never picked up on that the first time I watched it, but I do see what people mean now, because she lied. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she's not the real Helly. You know, she may be lying because she's Helena, or she may be lying because she's ashamed of being an Egan. I mean, if you found out that you were literally the devil of your world, would you go around telling your friends who you are? I mean, I'm sure she's very worried about how the other innies are going to react to her being an Egan, now that they know how bad the Egans are. I really didn't like the ending of the first episode of season 2, you know, where they use the music and that shot, that cinematography, that sort of, it's supposed to give the feeling of like the team is back together doing their thing, but the thing that they're doing is completely meaningless and they're being tricked. And I do believe that this is intentional. It's an intentional nauseating, sick, empty feeling that you're supposed to experience when you're watching that. And I hated it, but in a good way. Like, they did a good job, but it feels terrible. The animation from the first episode of season 2 is very interesting to think about, and it makes me think that the defiance that we experienced in season 1 was part of Lumen's plan, that Lumen is sort of playing 4D chess, but that isn't very satisfying, and I'm more inclined to take the show at face value, take the conflict at face value, in that they really did break out and there is a very real conflict between the innies. Because if Lumen is just setting everything up, then the conflict doesn't really exist. You know, it'll be like you woke up from a dream ending. It is very tempting though, because they may be testing new ways of quelling a worker rebellion, and this video might be part of that test. But maybe they didn't intend for the rebellion to happen, and they're using this as an opportunity to test this kind of method. But putting that aside, I think the simplest explanation of the animated video is just that they were trying to appease the innies. I mean, this is, whatever way you look at it, a compliance technique, and it did work extremely well on the four of them, because at the end of the episode you see them getting together and doing the assigned work with a big smile on their face. So if it was a compliance exercise or experiment, Lumen accomplished their goal perfectly. But to bring it back to my original point, in that everything in the story serves as a reflection of our real human condition in the real world, this animation serves as a reflection of the way that revolutionaries are co-opted by the very institutions that they oppose, like Che Guevara. Got it on the screen, right? Future time. Mark is such a dunce because this woman is just throwing herself at him and he's just ignoring all the signals. If a woman that looks like this and sounds like this comes to visit me at my house in the middle of the night, she better be ready, because she's in danger of me cooking her up a nice seafood dinner. I don't think I've ever been so turned on by the word stoop.
When you hugged me before, you suddenly became tense. What was that?
I'm just de-icing my stoop.